1 month before he was supposed to be a top 3 overall pick, Jalen Carter was booked for reckless driving charges. His teammate Devin Wilcox was dead.
A top NFL draft prospect is now facing charges for his role in a deadly crash that killed a teammate and a football staff member.
University of Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter now facing charges of reckless driving and racing in connection with the January crash that killed his teammate.
2 cars had been racing through Athens at over 100 miles an hour, and Carter was facing charges that could have ended his career before it even started.
Carter faces misdemeanor charges for his role in a crash that killed a teammate and football staff member.
He was the most dominant defensive player in a deep draft class, but already had some character concerns before this incident, and this only made people a lot more nervous, rightly so.
With Carter, there's some character issues. Does he get along with everybody?
Teams would run away from him in the draft. However, the Philadelphia Eagles would actually trade up and draft him. 3 years later, he was signing the richest contract in defensive tackle history for the NFL. But his career could have really gone either way. Jalen Carter came out of Florida as a 5-star recruit, a top 20 prospect in the entire nation. He was putting up numbers in high school that made college coaches lose their mind. He posted 12 sacks as a senior, and the stories about him doing windmill dunks in gym class were only half true because he was doing that stuff in 5th grade when he was only about 5 foot something and probably 100 pounds soaking wet. Now he was 6'3", 314 pounds of raw athlete who moved like someone much smaller. And when he committed to Georgia, the Bulldogs knew they were getting someone special. Jalen's tape at Georgia confirmed everything the recruiting services said about him, and he became a centerpiece on the defensive line of back-to-back national champion teams in 2021 and 2022. With 32 tackles, 3 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles in a defense full of future NFL players during that 2022 season. He was first-team All-SEC and first-team All-American that year. NFL scouts had penciled him in as a top 5 pick before he ever even declared. And this is where things start to get heavy, because when you're supposed to be maybe the first overall pick, the floor is not just high, it's impossibly high. The 2021 Georgia defense is still talked about in college circles as one of the greatest defenses ever assembled at that level, and Carter was the heart of it at the defensive tackle. He commanded double teams on every single snap and still found ways to disrupt plays in the backfield. Along with his disruptive behavior, he was able to make things easier for the linebackers behind him. NFL scouts who watched that team said Carter was the player they couldn't stop game planning for because he was too quick for the interior offensive linemen and too strong for the guards. So you either gave up size or gave up speed, and he exploited whichever one you chose to give up. The national championship game that year only reinforced what teams had seen on tape all season, as Jalen was a factor on every passing down, and helped set the tone for a defense that kept opponent scores low enough for Georgia to win comfortably. Every game became a test of whether you were worthy of the hype, and the margin for being just good instead of generational is razor thin, which meant that the nickname Baby Rhino fit him perfectly. Carter played like a 300-pound animal that nobody could actually block, as he had the size to stop the run and quickness to get to the quarterback, and the film showed someone who was dominant at the point of attack. He was incredibly talented, and he was on his way to being a top 3 pick in the 2023 overall draft. There was some potential questions about his work ethic and motivation coming out of the season, however that wasn't going to stop him from going too high. That was the story heading into January that year, and one night changed everything as he received that mugshot and watched everything he had built start to crumble in real time. On January 15, 2023, a crash in Athens, Georgia killed 2 people and changed the lives of many more.
University of Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter now facing charges of reckless driving and racing in connection with the January crash that killed his teammate. Lineman Devin Wilcox from New Milford and staffer Chandler LaCroix died in the wreck.
Devin Wilcox was 20 years old and a teammate of Carter's on the Georgia football team, while Chandler LaCroix was a recruiting analyst for the school, and police said both vehicles were traveling at speeds consistent with racing, switching lanes, driving in the center turn lane, and going in opposite lanes of traffic at a rate that exceeded the speed limit by a massive margin. The investigation found that LaCroix's car was traveling at approximately 104 miles an hour shortly before it left the roadway, struck 2 power poles and several trees, and rolled with her blood alcohol concentration at 0.197 at the time of the crash, which is nearly 2.5 times the legal limit in Georgia. The crash happened around 2:45 in the morning after the Georgia players and staff had celebrated their national championship parade earlier that week. And the timing made it much worse because this was supposed to be a time of celebration, not a tragedy. Carter was not in the vehicle, but he was in another car that was also racing, and investigators said both drivers were operating their vehicles in a manner consistent with racing on the same road at the same time. So he turned himself into the Athens police and was booked on reckless driving and racing, meaning that he had to pay a $4,000 bond, which he did pay and was released on the same night. NFL teams were watching as the narrative around his draft stock started to shift in real time, and he released a statement saying he intended to return to Athens to answer the charges and make sure the complete and accurate truth was presented, with no question in his mind that he would be fully exonerated of any criminal wrongdoing. The statement was carefully worded and his lawyers had clearly helped craft it, but the damage to his reputation was done by the point in time because the video of the car crash scene and the details about the alleged racing had spread across social media within hours of the warrants being announced. But the legal outcome was only part of the problem because the NFL scouting combine came and Carter was supposed to speak to the media on the same day the warrants became public, but he didn't show up. There are also multiple reports that said coaches at Georgia who could have advocated for him chose not to because they had grown disenchanted with his practice habits and his attitude over time, as the character concerns were not just about one night in Athens. Teams picked up on that, so the draft floor that everyone assumed was top 3 or top 4 was suddenly starting to look much lower, and the phone calls that should have been coming from the top of the board were not coming at all. Teams that were doing background calls on him heard the same story from multiple sources, that Jalen was talented but not always focused, that he showed up late to meetings sometimes, and he didn't always give maximum effort in practice when the stakes were low. Now, none of that is criminal, but for teams deciding whether to spend a top 5 pick on a 22-year-old, it was enough to make them look elsewhere. And this is where the real test began, not in a courtroom or a combine media room, but in the weeks that followed when every team in the league had to decide whether the talent was worth the risk. Teams would stay away despite the talent, and it was pretty clear that a lot of teams just weren't going to deal with his nonsense. There was simply too much risk in taking him and too many questions about who he was as a person, whether the incident in Athens was an aberration or a pattern, as Carter watched his draft stock fall from the top 3 all the way into uncertain territory. And on April 27th, that's exactly what happened. Team after team passed on him, then the Eagles made a move that nobody expected.
With the 9th pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select Jalen Carter, defensive tackle, Georgia.
But the Eagles saw that everybody else missed when they looked at the same character concerns and saw something different. Looked at the incidents in Athens and saw a young person who made a terrible mistake, not a pattern of behavior. They looked at the practice habit concerns and saw a player who wasn't always focused in college, but showed up when it mattered the most on the field. The Eagles had done their homework on Carter for months leading up to the draft. They had talked to people around Georgia who knew him well enough to give him the honest picture of who he was. The consensus in that building was that the talent was real and the character concerns were overblown by comparison. Howie Roseman would trade the 10th overall pick and a 4th round pick to the Chicago Bears, going up to number 9 overall and drafting Jalen Carter. The decision wasn't without controversy, with the questions about character and accountability coming immediately, as Roseman and the Eagles coaching staff defended the pick by saying they believed in the person they were getting, that they had the infrastructure in place to support him, with a big part of that being the presence of veteran leaders in the defensive line room, and some of his former Georgia teammates like Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean who already knew him and would help him adjust. Later being drafted, Nolan Smith as well, a former teammate. Carter spoke about being drafted with the emotion being visible, as he was just thinking about his family and how he'd been grinding all his life for that moment right there. He acknowledged the night before when he was in Kansas City at the draft site that he got a call and everything happened so fast, as he was just grateful for the opportunity. The league moved on and the story became whether the Eagles had made the right call or whether the character concerns were going to catch up to them. But the Eagles had a plan for that too. They knew that Jalen needed structure and accountability, and they had Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham in that defensive line room as a veteran presence who could help keep him on track. Both Fletcher and Brandon had been through their own struggles early in their careers and had learned how to be a professional. The Eagles believed that having someone like Carter around would make the difference. The bet wasn't just about the talent, it was about the environment and about whether the Eagles could provide the right setting for Carter to succeed. The organization felt confident that they could. But before we get into his NFL career, if you're enjoying this type of content, I'd appreciate it if you all subscribe. Helps let YouTube and myself know that you all like these types of videos. Now let's get back into it. His rookie season gave everyone a quick look at what he could actually do at the NFL level, and it was scary. He played 16 games, had 6 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 1 scoop and score TD, and 33 tackles as he finished second in the AP Defensive Rookie of the Year voting. He was showing flashes of dominance that made him a top prospect, even though the defense around him was also good. He was not yet the focal point of the Eagles line. The traits were there, and people around the league were waiting to see if he could flip the switch. It flipped in 2024 when Carter took over games in a way that reminded everyone why Georgia thought he was special. Week 3 against the New Orleans Saints, Carter took over in a way that nobody really expected. He was in the backfield all day, disrupting plays before they could even develop, and the coaching staff started to realize that they had something special in their hands. The Saints coming in were 2-0 that season, averaging 45 points per game, but they had no answer for his combination of speed and power, only scoring 12 points. That was a moment when people inside the building started to believe that the gamble on his character concerns might actually pay off on the field. However, the game that really announced who he had become came in the divisional round of the playoffs against the Los Angeles Rams. He would go off for 2 sacks, 5 tackles, 2 TFLs, and a forced fumble. But the most important play of that game came in the fourth quarter. The Rams were trailing in the final moments and were driving into scoring position. 1:13 left on 3rd and 2 when Carter came immediately up the line and engulfed Matthew Stafford in the backfield for a sack that pushed him to 4th and long.
Stafford in trouble, he's sacked! Brought down by Jalen Carter! 4th down, final minute clock running, gotta have it.
And there's nobody left.
And the clock is running and they are huddling because it's down to this play, they've got to get.
That saved the Eagles in the game, and they went on to win that game and a few weeks later advanced to the Super Bowl. And that play would become one of the defining images of Carter's career up to that point. Coaches said after the game they had seen that kind of burst before in practice, but never in a game situation when the stakes were that high. Then came the Super Bowl against the Eagles and Patrick Mahomes, and that Eagles defense as a whole that entire night was legendary. They sacked Mahomes 6 times, which was the most time he had been sacked in a playoff game, with Carter being part of that pass rush that made the Chiefs quarterback look uncomfortable all night. There's one particular play where Carter came in free on a stunt and hit Mahomes in the face at the same time the ball was stripped from him. The Eagles won 40-22 in a game that was never really close, and Jalen was a Super Bowl champ.
For the second time, the Vince Lombardi Trophy is headed to Philadelphia. Eagles fly in Super Bowl 59.
With the tape from that game showing exactly why the Eagles had made the trade to get him, as he finished the season as the youngest defensive tackle in Eagles history to make the Pro Bowl at just 23 years old. The full 2024 campaign was even better than his rookie season, playing 16 games, 15 starts, 4.5 sacks, and he led the entire team with pressures with 45, tackles for loss with 12, and quarterback hits with 16. Those are not always the kind of numbers that show up in real time, but anyone who watches the games knows that pressures and QB hits are the stats that actually matter for a pass rusher. He was second team All-Pro that year, made a Pro Bowl, and was just 23 years old, just getting started. He seemed like someone who was starting to understand how to use his gifts at the NFL level, rather than just relying on raw athleticism. But the biggest question was still ahead of him. Could he sustain this level of dominance? But before we get back to the show, a quick word from our sponsor, Prize Picks. The football preseason is officially here, and there's no better place to run your game than Prize Picks, America's #1 sports pick app. We've got star players on new teams and an incredible rookie class ready to take over as we get ready for the biggest football season yet. What I love about Prize Picks is that you don't have to just stick to week action. You can lock in full season picks right now on player projections. I already put together a 3-pick lineup that I'm locked into for the season. Currently, I got Dak Prescott at more than 4,024.5 passing yards, Bijan Robinson at more than 1,149.5 rush yards, and Caleb Williams at more than 3,599.5 passing yards. Building your lineup is super easy. You just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, submit your lineup, and follow your progress all year long right inside the app. Plus, Prize Picks is available in all 50 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. Again, that's download the app today and use code CLNS to get $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. And I'm going to say that actually one more time. That's $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, America's #1 sports pick app. Now let's get back into it. The 2025 season started off with controversy as the Eagles would open up against the Dallas Cowboys. And this would happen right after they dropped the banner. During an injury delay after the opening kickoff, Carter and Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott got face-to-face on the field, with what happened next being caught on camera and immediately becoming the talk of the NFL. Jalen spit on Dak Prescott as they began to separate, and he was ejected from the game immediately without playing a single down. Jalen apologized after the game and called it a mistake that happened on his side, with him saying it just wouldn't happen again.
Could you explain what happened from your vantage point?
You know, it was a mistake that happened on my side.
But the moment added to the narrative that some people had been building about him since college with the idea he hadn't fully matured yet. The NFL announced that since he had already been ejected and hadn't participated in any plays, they would consider the 1-game suspension already served, and he forfeited his week 1 game check worth $57,000. I can't emphasize enough that this happened right after they dropped the Super Bowl championship banner. So that means that the cameras were rolling on multiple angles, and the NFL couldn't ignore this even if they wanted to. The NFL Players Association didn't appeal the punishment, which was notable because Rosenhaus typically fights every suspension, and the fact that they told the league Carter would not appeal suggests that his representatives understood how bad the optics were and wanted to move past it as quickly as possible. The season got harder from there as Carter underwent treatment on both his shoulders in early December and missed 3 games, with the injuries before returning for the final games of the regular season, with his numbers of the year reflecting the difficulties at 3 sacks and 5 tackles for loss over 11 games. Which was a significant drop from the player who had dominated in 2024. Even with the season that fell well short of what people thought he should be doing, he still was voted to the Pro Bowl. So even though this season and the Eagles season as a whole didn't go the way either wanted, he still got at least some personal accolade, but that was nothing compared to what was happening in a few months. In July 2025, just before training camp actually started, the Eagles would sign Jalen Carter to a 4-year, $152 million extension with $106 million guaranteed. The average annual value of $38 million made it the richest contract for a defensive tackle in NFL history in both guaranteed money and total value, as the Eagles locked him up through 2031. He's 25 years old, a 2-time Pro Bowler, 2nd-team All-Pro, and a Super Bowl champ, coming off a season that was shortened by injuries and disciplinary issues, but still ended with being recognized by his peers with the Pro Bowl. And the contract was not just about what he had done, but about what the Eagles believed he would become. The belief from the organization being that the best version of Jalen Carter was still ahead of him, as they bet that the 9th overall draft pick that they made was paying off in ways that nobody who passed on him could have predicted. The narrative that had haunted him since Athens had shifted from character concerns to the price of talent that was too good to pass up. Roseman said in the announcement that the extension was about rewarding production and about betting on the person that they believed Carter would continue to be. The story from arrested to $152 million is more than about football, as it's about how one night can take everything from one person, and a second chance, when you're willing to do the work, can actually lead somewhere that nobody expected, because Carter wasn't perfect. But he played, he dominated, and has matured at least a little bit. We'll see how he does off this new contract this next season, but I expect him to be great again. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.